The tension in the CNN debate studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Under the blazing studio lights, two of America's most polarizing political figures sat across from each other, ready for what would become the most shocking political confrontation of 2025. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the 35-year-old progressive firebrand from New York, sat confidently in her signature burgundy blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a professional style that had become her trademark. Her eyes held that familiar fire that had made her famous since her stunning upset victory over Joe Crowley in 2018, transforming her from a bartender in the Bronx to one of the most influential voices in American politics. Across from her, Ted Cruz, the 54-year-old Republican senator from Texas, adjusted his tie with the calculated precision of a man who had spent decades in the political arena. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit immaculate, and his expression carried that familiar smirk that had made him both beloved by conservatives and reviled by liberals across America. What happened in the next 90 seconds would send shockwaves across America and change both of their political legacies forever. But before we dive into this incredible story, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the explosive political drama we cover. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when one of America's most calculating politicians meets his match. This wasn't just another political debate. This was the moment when America's ugly truths about immigration and identity collided with its highest ideals, live on national television. And by the end of this confrontation, one career would be transformed, one would be humiliated, and the entire country would be talking about what it really means to be American. To understand how we got to this explosive moment, you need to know who these two people really are and why this debate mattered so much to America's future. At 35, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had already become one of the most recognizable faces in American politics. Born in the Bronx to working-class Puerto Rican parents, she had grown up understanding struggle in a way that most politicians never would. Her father, Sergio Ocasio-Roman, was an architect who died when she was just 19, leaving the family in financial hardship. Her mother, Blanca Ocasio-Cortez, worked as a house cleaner and bus driver to make ends meet. AOC's rise to Congress was the stuff of American dreams. After graduating from Boston University with degrees in economics and international relations, she returned to the Bronx and worked as a bartender and waitress while caring for her family. When she decided to run for Congress in 2018, she was a complete unknown, taking on 10-term incumbent Joe Crowley with a shoestring budget and an army of volunteers. Her victory shocked the political establishment. Here was a 28-year-old Latina woman who had worked service jobs, who understood what it meant to choose between paying rent and buying groceries, who had defeated one of the most powerful Democrats in Congress. She brought a fresh voice to Washington that spoke directly to young Americans who felt left behind by traditional politics. But AOC's rapid rise also made her a target. Conservatives attacked everything from her policy positions to her background, often with barely concealed contempt for her working-class roots and Hispanic heritage. She had been called everything from a communist to unqualified, with many of the attacks carrying undertones that had nothing to do with her politics and everything to do with who she was. Ted Cruz, on the other hand, represented everything AOC was fighting against. Born Raphael Edward Cruz in Calgary, Canada, to a Cuban father and Irish-American mother, Cruz had built his career on being the smartest guy in the room. He was a champion debater at Princeton University, graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, and had served as a law clerk to Supreme Court Chief Justice William Rehnquist. Cruz's political career had been marked by his willingness to take extreme positions and his talent for self-promotion. He had led the charge to shut down the government in 2013 over Obamacare, had been one of the last Republicans to endorse Trump in 2016 after Trump had insulted his wife and father, and had built his brand on being the conservative willing to fight anyone, anywhere, anytime. But Cruz also had a reputation for being one of the most disliked politicians in Washington. His Senate colleagues, including Republicans, often described him as arrogant, calculating, and willing to throw anyone under the bus for political gain. His presidential ambitions had been repeatedly thwarted, first by Trump in 2016, then by his own reputation for being more interested in headlines than legislation. The debate on this particular evening was supposed to focus on immigration policy, an issue where both politicians had staked out clear positions. AOC supported comprehensive immigration reform, a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, and an end to family separation policies. Cruz had built his career on opposing these positions, calling for stricter border enforcement and limits on legal immigration. CNN had billed it as the future of American immigration policy, featuring two of the most vocal advocates on opposite sides of the issue. The network expected fireworks, but nobody anticipated what was about to happen. The first sign of trouble came when moderator Anderson Cooper asked about the moral implications of family separation policies. AOC had just finished making an impassioned case for treating asylum seekers with dignity when Cruz interrupted with his typical prosecutorial style. "Well, Anderson," Cruz said, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone that had made him famous, "I think what the Congresswoman fails to understand is that we're talking about American sovereignty here. We're talking about the rule of law." He turned to face AOC directly, his expression shifting to something more personal. "You know, Congresswoman, you speak with such passion about immigration, but I have to wonder, do you really understand what it means to be American? Do you understand the values that built this country?" The question hung in the air like a warning shot. AOC's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. She had heard this line of attack before, but never so blatantly on national television. "I think I understand American values quite well, Senator," she replied evenly. "My family has been living them for generations." Cruz's smile widened. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "But that's exactly my point, Congresswoman. You see, some of us have deep roots in this country. Some of us understand American traditions instinctively because they're in our blood." He paused for effect, clearly building to his big moment. "You're the daughter of immigrants, from a community that still struggles with assimilation. How can someone who grew up in that environment truly understand what makes America great?" The studio fell silent. Even Anderson Cooper looked stunned. Cruz had just questioned AOC's fundamental right to speak for America based on her family's immigrant background. But then Cruz went even further. "Maybe," he said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone, "maybe you should focus on helping your community assimilate better instead of trying to change America to accommodate people who don't belong here." The words hit like a bomb. The studio audience gasped. Social media would later call it one of the most openly racist statements ever made by a sitting senator on live television. But AOC's response, nobody saw it coming. What she said next didn't just destroy Cruz's argument. It exposed a truth about him that left the entire nation speechless. AOC sat there for a moment, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The pause felt like an eternity. The audience leaned forward. Anderson Cooper looked nervous, and Cruz sat back in his chair, clearly expecting either an angry outburst or a defensive response. He got neither. Instead, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a big smile, not a fake smile, but a small, knowing smile that somehow looked more dangerous than any angry response could have been. "Senator Cruz," she said, her voice so calm it was almost a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in to hear her. "I have a question for you." Cruz, perhaps sensing he'd gone too far, but unable to back down now, gestured for her to continue. "In all your years in the Senate, have you ever stopped to think about the irony of your own words?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Cruz's confidence began to waver slightly, but he pressed forward. "I'm not sure what you mean, Congresswoman." "Well," AOC said, her voice taking on the tone of someone who had just been handed the perfect opening, "you just told me that I don't belong here, that my family doesn't understand American values because we're immigrants." She leaned forward slightly, her legal training evident in how she was building her argument piece by piece. "But Senator, your father, Rafael Bienvenido Cruz, was born in Cuba. He didn't even become an American citizen until you were 4 years old." The audience began to murmur. This was not where anyone expected this to go. "Your mother was born in Delaware, but you were born in Calgary, Canada. You didn't renounce your Canadian citizenship until 2014 when you were considering running for president. Cruz tried to interrupt. Now, wait just a minute. But AOC held up her hand with the quiet authority of someone who knows they have the facts on their side. I'm not finished, Senator. You see, she continued, my family came to New York from Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has been an American territory since 1898. My grandparents were American citizens by birth. My parents were American citizens by birth. I'm a second-generation American citizen. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering her next line with surgical precision. You, on the other hand, are the Canadian-born son of a Cuban refugee who didn't become an American citizen until the 1970s. You held dual citizenship until you were 44 years old. The studio was dead silent now. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. So tell me, Senator, AOC continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, who exactly doesn't belong here? Who exactly doesn't understand American values? The audience erupted. Half were applauding, half were shouting, and Cruz sat there with his mouth slightly open, clearly unable to formulate a response. But AOC wasn't done. She had been building to this moment her entire political career. You want to talk about assimilation, Senator? Let's talk about assimilation. My family came to New York with nothing and built a life through hard work. My mother cleaned houses so I could go to college. My father worked construction to pay for our apartment in the Bronx. Her voice was rising with passion now. We didn't hide our heritage. We didn't change our names. We didn't pretend to be something we weren't. We became Americans by embracing American values, hard work, opportunity, the belief that anyone can make it if they try hard enough. She looked directly at Cruz, her eyes blazing. You, on the other hand, were born Raphael Edward Cruz, but you go by Ted because it sounds more American. Your father fled Cuba as a political refugee, but you've spent your career demonizing other refugees. You've built your political brand on attacking immigrants while being the son of an immigrant yourself. The contrast was stark and devastating. AOC was just getting started. You want to know what American values look like, Senator? They look like my mother, who worked 2 jobs to support her family after my father died. They look like my grandmother, who came to New York speaking no English, but raised American children who became teachers, nurses, and yes, members of Congress. She stood up, her presence commanding the entire studio. American values look like embracing everyone who comes here seeking opportunity, not building walls to keep them out. American values look like creating more opportunity, not hoarding it for people who were lucky enough to be born into privilege. Cruz tried to speak, but AOC was on a roll. You've spent your entire career attacking people like my family, people who represent everything beautiful about America. You've made a career out of dividing us, of making some Americans feel like they're more American than others. The audience was on its feet now, many people applauding loudly. Even some of the CNN crew were nodding in agreement. But here's what you don't understand, Senator, AOC said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her convictions. America isn't about where your grandparents came from. It's about where your grandchildren are going. It's about the dreams we build together, not the fears we use to tear each other down. She sat back down, folded her hands, and looked directly into the camera. America is great because we've always been a nation of immigrants, of people who came here seeking something better. We're great because we've always believed that it doesn't matter where you come from, it matters where you're going. The studio erupted in sustained applause. Anderson Cooper looked like he had just witnessed history being made. Cruz sat there, his face red, clearly unable to respond to the systematic dismantling of his entire argument. And Senator, AOC added, her voice dropping to that same whisper-quiet tone that had started this whole exchange. Maybe before you ever again question someone else's right to be American, you should look in the mirror and ask yourself what you've actually done to make America better. The silence that followed was deafening. Cruz, the man who had built his reputation on never backing down from a fight, sat there speechless. For the first time in his political career, he had met someone who was not only unafraid of his attacks, but was capable of turning them back on him with devastating effectiveness. As the commercial break began, the cameras caught Cruz quickly gathering his papers and walking off the set. He didn't shake hands, didn't make eye contact, didn't even wait for the formal end of the segment. He just left, his exit as graceless as his attack had been. AOC remained in her seat, calmly accepting a bottle of water from a production assistant. She looked composed, even slightly surprised by the overwhelming response from the audience. Within minutes of the exchange, social media was exploding. The hashtag AOC destroys Cruz was trending nationwide, with clips of the confrontation being shared at a rate that threatened to crash Twitter's servers. The moment when AOC revealed Cruz's own immigrant background while defending her family's American credentials got over 20 million views in the first hour alone. The video of Cruz's speechless reaction became an instant meme, spawning thousands of variations with captions like, "When you realize you played yourself," and "The moment Ted Cruz learned about irony." Political Twitter was unanimous in its assessment. Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro, not known for praising progressive politicians, tweeted, "Regardless of politics, that was one of the most effective political responses I've ever seen. AOC just gave a masterclass in turning an attack into a counterattack." Liberal commentator Van Jones posted, "I've covered politics for 20 years, and I've never seen someone so completely dismantle an opponent's argument while simultaneously making a case for American values. That wasn't just a debate win, that was a moment of moral clarity." The political implications were immediate and far-reaching. Within hours, Republican senators were being asked to comment on Cruz's statements. Many distanced themselves from his remarks, with Senator Susan Collins saying, "I don't think questioning someone's fundamental right to be American based on their family background reflects our party's values." Democratic politicians rushed to praise AOC's response. Speaker Nancy Pelosi tweeted, "This is what leadership looks like, standing up for American values and defending the dignity of all Americans, regardless of their background." But perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Former President Barack Obama, who rarely comments on day-to-day political battles, posted a statement. "Tonight, we saw what American leadership looks like. We saw someone defend not just themselves, but the idea that America is big enough for all of us. That's the America I know and love." The media coverage was intense and largely favorable to AOC. CNN's own analysis called it a masterclass in political communication and moral clarity. The Washington Post's headline read, "How AOC Turned a Personal Attack into a Lesson in American Values." Even Fox News, typically hostile to progressive politicians, found itself in the awkward position of defending AOC's response. Tucker Carlson, often a critic of AOC, said on his show, "Look, I disagree with her politics completely, but what she did tonight was defend the American dream. She defended the idea that immigrants can become Americans and contribute to our country. That's not a liberal idea or a conservative idea. That's an American idea." For Ted Cruz, the aftermath was a political disaster. By morning, 3 major Texas newspapers had published editorials calling for him to apologize. His own office was flooded with calls from constituents expressing embarrassment about his comments. Cruz attempted damage control with a series of tweets, claiming his comments had been taken out of context and that he had the utmost respect for immigrant communities. But the damage was done. The video of his speechless reaction to AOC's response had been viewed over 50 million times, and no amount of Twitter explanations could undo the visual of him being completely outmaneuvered on live television. More damaging were the defections from his own party. Several Republican senators privately told reporters that Cruz's comments were embarrassing and not representative of Republican values. Some party donors began distancing themselves from Cruz, with one major contributor telling Politico, "We support strong border security, but we don't support attacking people's fundamental right to be American." The confrontation also highlighted the fundamental differences between the two politicians' approaches to immigration. AOC had used personal narrative and American values to make her case, while Cruz had relied on divisive rhetoric and personal attacks. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Legal experts noted that AOC's response was particularly effective because it combined personal story with constitutional principles. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe said, "She didn't just defend herself, she defended the constitutional principle that naturalized citizens and their children are fully American. That's not politics, that's law." The international response was equally significant. The BBC's coverage focused on how the exchange represented America's ongoing struggle with its identity as a nation of immigrants. The Times of London praised AOC's dignified response to a personal attack, while noting that Cruz's comments reflected the kind of nativism that has historically damaged America's global reputation. Canadian media had their own take on the controversy, with several outlets noting the irony of Cruz attacking immigrants while being Canadian-born himself. The Toronto Star's headline read, "Canadian-born senator attacks American-born congresswoman for not being American enough." But perhaps the most powerful responses came from ordinary Americans who shared their own immigration stories. Thousands of people posted on social media about their families' journeys to America, many using the hashtag #MyAmericanStory. The stories ranged from families who had been in America for generations to recent immigrants who had just received their citizenship. One post that went viral came from a high school teacher in Ohio. "My great-grandfather came from Ireland with nothing. My grandmother came from Germany fleeing the Nazis. My students' families come from everywhere: Somalia, Mexico, Vietnam, Syria. We're all American because we choose to be. AOC gets it, Cruz doesn't." The business community also weighed in, with several major corporations issuing statements about the importance of immigration to America's economic success. Tech executives, many of whom were immigrants themselves, praised AOC's defense of American values. Within a week of the debate, AOC's fundraising had exploded. Her campaign reported raising over $2 million from small donors inspired by her response. Messages poured in from across the country, many from people who had never donated to a political campaign before. "I've never given money to a politician," read one typical message from a donor in Michigan. "But after watching you defend what America really means, I had to contribute. Thank you for standing up for all of us." The confrontation also sparked a broader conversation about political discourse in America. Many commentators noted that AOC had managed to deliver a devastating political response without resorting to personal insults or inflammatory rhetoric. She had stuck to facts, personal experience, and constitutional principles. Communication experts began studying the exchange as an example of effective political communication. Georgetown University's Public Policy Institute announced it would be adding the AOC-Cruz confrontation to its curriculum on political rhetoric and debate strategy. The moment also highlighted the generational divide in American politics. AOC represented a new generation of politicians who were comfortable with their multicultural identities and saw diversity as a strength. Cruz represented an older approach that often seemed uncomfortable with America's changing demographics. Polling conducted in the days following the debate showed a significant shift in how Americans viewed both politicians. AOC's favorability ratings jumped 12 points, while Cruz's dropped by 8 points. More significantly, the poll showed that 67% of Americans agreed with AOC's definition of American values, while only 23% agreed with Cruz's approach. The generational divide was particularly stark. Among voters under 35, AOC's response was viewed favorably by 78% of respondents, while Cruz's comments were viewed unfavorably by 71%. Even among Republican voters under 35, 45% said they disagreed with Cruz's approach. As the weeks passed, the AOC-Cruz confrontation became a defining moment for both politicians. For AOC, it established her as a national leader capable of articulating a positive vision for America's future. For Cruz, it became a cautionary tale about the dangers of attacking someone's fundamental right to be American. The debate also had policy implications. AOC's response helped shift the national conversation about immigration from border security to American values. Polls showed increased support for comprehensive immigration reform, with many Americans saying the debate had changed their perspective on the issue. Most importantly, the confrontation reminded Americans of what political leadership could look like. In an era often defined by divisive rhetoric and personal attacks, AOC had shown that it was possible to respond to hatred with dignity, to answer attacks with facts, and to defend not just yourself, but the principles that make America great. As one editorial in the New York Times put it, "In a single moment, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reminded us that America's strength has always come from its diversity, its willingness to embrace people from everywhere who share our values. Ted Cruz tried to divide us. AOC showed us how to come together." The lesson was clear. In America, your worth isn't determined by where your parents came from, but by what you're willing to do for the country you call home. And sometimes, it takes someone who truly understands that principle to remind the rest of us what it really means to be American. If this story inspired you like it inspired millions of Americans, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this video with everyone you know. This is exactly the kind of political courage and American spirit that we need more of in our country. Let us know in the comments what you thought of AOC's incredible response. And don't forget to check out our other videos about the real heroes who are fighting for America's future. The lesson was clear. In America, your worth isn't determined by where your grandparents came from. It's determined by what you're willing to do for the country you call home. And sometimes it takes someone who truly understands that principle to remind the rest of us what that really means.